Okay, we're now starting talk 10 in the series on the judgment seat of Christ, and we're in chapter 3 of the book, and what we're looking at now is the criteria for judgment, the criteria by which we as Christians will be judged, not unbelievers, we as believers will be judged. And so let's look now at criterion number 24. By the way, these are just as I number them. These are not numbered in the Bible, in case you're wondering. These are the way I've set them out. So criterion number 24, Jesus will also judge us on the basis of whether we had the fear of the Lord. Now, probably more is promised to those who have the fear of the Lord than to any other single thing in the whole Bible. And I often say to people that having the fear of the Lord and also two other things, the love of the truth and the willingness to humble yourself, those three things, if you have them, will make you into a kind of homing pigeon that keeps coming back to God. So whenever you stray away, these three things will bring you back. Well, this is one of them. And if you've got this quality, the fear of the Lord, it will keep you close to God, and if you wander from him, it will bring you back to him. So, what is it, this thing, the fear of the Lord? To have the fear of God or the fear of the Lord, it means that a person has a reverent awe for God and for his power and majesty. So it involves deep respect, but it goes beyond that, and it includes literally fearing God. Now, some would regard that as inappropriate or even impossible, that God could actually want you to do that, but there is an element of that in it. We're meant to fear him for what he can do and what he will do about our sin, and also for the fact that he's going to judge us. And if we do fear him in that way, or at any rate if that's included within how we feel about him, then it'll bring about many changes in our lives. So, having the fear of the Lord will cause you to live differently. It'll cause you to have much better lives than you would otherwise have lived. Therefore, having the fear of the Lord in itself is a good characteristic. And so it in itself will be directly rewarded because we're commanded to have it. But the point is this, it will also lead indirectly to other rewards, because having the fear of the Lord will bring about changes in your nature, behaviour, priorities, decisions that will cause you to receive rewards of other kinds indirectly. Can you see that? There's a direct reward for having the fear of the Lord. There's also the indirect rewards that come from those changes that are brought about by the fact that you have the fear of the Lord. So in both those ways we'll be rewarded. So let's just hear a few verses on this subject. Chris, do you want to read them, these four on page 98?
The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honour and life. Proverbs 22 verse 4. Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you and worked for those who take refuge in you. Psalm 31 verse 19. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. Psalm 34 verse 7. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack. Psalm 34 verse 9.
Yeah. So let me just say a little bit more about this thing of actually fearing, because some people I know struggle with this and perhaps don't even agree with what I'm saying here. But the concept of fearing God, and remember we're fearing, consider it this way, fearing standing before Jesus Christ. Now, we saw the other week how the Apostle John reacted when he met Jesus Christ in his glorified condition. And of course, he'd spent 3.5 years with him in his unglorified condition as an ordinary man. When he met him as he really is, he fell on his face, afraid of him. Now, I can identify with that to a degree. Let me just give you one or two examples of how that happened for me. I was in the police many years ago. I spent 3 years in it before I went back to doing law again. And I can identify with that fear of very senior officers that is in some ways akin to this. So if you take this, the very first day I joined the force, we were all a bunch of civilians, and we were gathered in a room, all the new recruits on that day. And at that point, all of a sudden, this superintendent walked into the room in uniform, and the sergeant who was in the room with us, he sort of barked at us to stand to attention. And of course, we were just civilians. Notionally, we were policemen, but we'd only been policemen for about half a day. And this superintendent walked in, and we all had to stand to attention. And as we did so, I felt a real fear of him and of his uniform. Now, you might say, why was I feeling fear of him and his uniform? He wasn't there to harm me. I was on his side. I was one of his people. But just seeing an officer that senior walk straight into a room and also catching me by surprise was startling. And I actually felt a little bit of what this thing is that God calls the fear of the Lord. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but you wouldn't fear someone who was going to reward you, would you? Well, I did, because I got a commendation on one occasion, and I was supposed to go and receive this commendation. Now, I had to go and receive it from a senior officer. It was a chief constable's commendation, but I didn't get it from him, thankfully. I got it from someone more junior, but I got it from a senior officer, and just going to receive a commendation made me feel scared. Now, another time, again, this is an example from the police force, but that's the way it is. Very often the Queen or Princess Diana or someone like that would come to visit the town or visit the area. When they did, we got called in to line the streets, and we had to be there, crowd control and so forth. One particular day, I remember distinctly, the Queen came along, and she came 2 or 3 times actually, but this particular day, I was stood by the roadside, and she came along, and then she stopped. You know how they stop every so often? Well, she decided to stop right next to me. And she wasn't looking at me, but she was just stood only 3 feet away. I could have put my arm out and touched her on the shoulder if I'd wanted to. But as she stood right next to me, I felt again this thing that's a little bit like the fear of the Lord. And I felt rooted to the spot. I felt I couldn't move. And the idea of, I just was thinking I could reach out and touch you. But the idea of doing so was so unthinkable. My arms were almost paralyzed. I wasn't planning to cut her on the shoulder. I'd have been arrested myself. But I just felt for that moment a little bit of what it means. Now, these people, who are these? A superintendent, a chief constable, the Queen, you know. These are small beer compared to who we're going to meet. And so the example I gave about the commendation, I'm not trying to show off, I'm just telling you that the point is that even when you're going to be praised, you can feel fear because of who it is that you're meeting. And so just multiply that about 1 million times over, and you may begin to get the picture of who it is that we're going to meet.
So are you saying that what you were feeling was you understood the potential of their position
Yeah.
to, if you were doing wrong, what they could do to you?
I think it's partly that. John was just saying there, did I feel the potential of their position, that if I did wrong, what they could do to me? I think there's an element of that. And it's partly that, what they could do to me, because I've said previously, and need to say again, there will be many people, probably all of us, will be rebuked at the judgment seat. It's wrong to think that just there'll be no rebuke. There will be rebuke, at least for some, and perhaps probably for all. Rebuke of something. And I don't want to be rebuked by him. But it's not just that. It's an awe for the person concerned. Now, at that time, I was in awe of police chief superintendents and people like that. I'm less in awe of them now, but at the time, as a young recruit, brand new recruit, these people seemed immense to me. And all that scrambled egg on the cap and braid and all these things just made me transfixed. Now the thing is, all they had on their cap was a little bit of scrambled egg and a nicer uniform than me. But what's Jesus got? You know, he's going to make the way that Prince William looked on his wedding day seem shabbily dressed. And he's going to have a radiance about him that's going to be, even for those of us who are absolutely on his side, is going to be awesome. And awesome is a word that is overused. Now, awesome means awesome. And it's something which is going to be startling and will have many of us rooted to the spot, stammering, unable to speak. At the best, some of us will fall on our faces, as John did. So that's what I'm saying. Now that's what the fear of the Lord can involve. And if you have that fear, if you have a fear of superintendents and chief constables, you're unlikely ever to go very far wrong in the police force. The fellows who didn't have a fear of senior officers were the ones that went wrong. Do you see? It's counterintuitive. Fearing them means you don't incur their wrath. Not fearing them means that you do. Do you see?
Respect.
Respect is, that's part of it. So the fear of the Lord involves several facets. It's like looking at a building from different angles. You've got the front of the building, they're the same building, but it's different aspects of it. So respect is very much part of it. But it's not just respect in a mild way, it's respect in a very intense way. And it's more than just respect, much more than that. So, at any rate, that's why that quality is so commended by God and so much a requirement for us, and why it carries with it so much promise, because it will literally transform the way you live. So, criterion number 25. Jesus will also judge us on the basis of what we did to care for and provide for our own families, in particular our own parents and children. Now I'm speaking here not of the church, I'm speaking of our own blood relatives, our own families, in particular elderly parents and also our own children. Now in book 1, I go into quite a bit of detail about this, about the duty that we have to care for the elderly and for our own parents. And God takes that duty seriously. And here's a verse from 1 Timothy. Do you want to read that out, Chris? 1 Timothy 5:8.
If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Now that's a verse addressed to Christians, not unbelievers. Because how can a man disown the faith if he has no faith? And likewise, how can he be worse than an unbeliever if he is an unbeliever? So the point is that this is addressed to believers. And we're commanded to have regard to the needs of our families and elderly relatives in particular. Now, that ought to be obvious, but it's not the way that society is going. And so if you look at the startling decline in respect for the elderly in Western society, it really is shocking. And you see it not only in society at large, but you see it most visibly in hospitals, where the elderly are systematically neglected and even abused, not by everyone, not at all by everyone, but by a sufficient number to make it something that is not exceptional, but rather bordering on typical. And that there's a degree of contempt and disregard and disdain and lack of respect for the elderly. Now that lack of respect doesn't begin and end with the health service. It comes out of a wider lack of respect that's in society at large. And so we in the church are not meant to reflect society at large, we're meant to be the opposite of it. And here's one place where God wants us to be the opposite of society at large. In respect for parents, caring for parents, and so forth.
Can I just share something?
Yeah.
I read in the newspaper that this elderly lady on the railway, she started to fall down at the escalator.
Yeah.
And one or two of the other passengers went to help, whilst staff just stood back and watched. So the chap who wrote the letter went and said, why didn't you do something? You could see she was in danger. She was elderly, she was in her 80s. And they said, we're not people handle trained.
So this is on the railway. The people that let this lady fall down an escalator, and the public tried to help her, but they said the reason the staff didn't, when asked why they didn't help, was because they weren't people trained in how to do that. Nobody's ever trained me how to rescue someone falling down an escalator, but I'd have a go at it.
That's what this man said.
Yeah.
Was
Yes,
instinctive.
that's right. So, but this attitude of not caring for our own relatives is widespread. And I can remember once when I've given this example, I think, on another talk, but I was a solicitor when I was in practice, and this Christian man came to me because he knew we were a Christian law firm, and he said to me, he asked me if I would provide powers of attorney and so forth for his parents. And he then said that his parents were missionaries and that would I do it for free because they were missionaries. Okay? And he himself wasn't a missionary, he was working in some job. But the point was, his mindset was that I, being a Christian solicitor, ought to work for free for his parents because they were Christians, but it never entered his mind to think that he might pay their legal bill. Now that thought never entered into his mind in the slightest. So he thought that I ought to pay for them, but not him. What I'm getting at is, what God wants is for us to have this as a starting point in our thinking, that we care for our blood relatives, in particular elderly parents. And that's to be considered by us as important. And at present it's not. And in the wider society it's decreasing. But that, and also that's affecting even within the church. And we need to change that. So those of us who are capable, and not everybody is, need to care for their parents when they grow old. And it's an obligation, and it's a commandment in fact, but it's one which carries a promise with it. So would you like to read, Chris, from top of page 99?
Honour your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Exodus 20, verse 12. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honour your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 to 3.
Yeah. Now that duty to look after parents is not just a question of obeying your parents, but honouring them in every way, at all ages, whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old or whatever you are. And when we see that actually exemplified in Jesus, even when he was on the cross, he made provision for Mary, because Mary is a widow by now, and so he had a widowed mother. Now he was the eldest son, and it fell to him in particular to care for her. He was her pension. He was her provider. He was her National Health Service. He was her Department of Health and Social Security. He was everything for her. Now when he was on the cross, when he had a lot to think about, he made provision for Mary, and what did he do? He asked John the Apostle to look after her. Now he didn't ask his 4 brothers to look after her, because they weren't believers at that stage. They were later. 2 of them wrote books in the Bible, James and Jude. But at that time, they were not believers. But the point I'm making is that even in the midst of what he was doing on the most important day in world history, Jesus was providing for his elderly mother. So that is an example of what we're talking about. And so, at any rate, my submission to you is that at the judgment seat, this is one of the things that we'll be judged on as believers. And we mustn't allow other activities or preoccupations or even religious duties to take the place of our duty to care for our parents. And Jesus actually addressed this in the Gospels, where religious people, Pharisees, etc., were not doing what God wanted them to do for their parents, so that they could do some man-made religious activity that they wanted to do. Do you want to read that, Chris, from Mark 7, 9 to 13?
And he said to them, You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honour your father and your mother,' and 'He who speaks evil of father or mother, let him surely die.' Which you say, 'If a man tells his father or his mother, what ye would have gained from me is korban, that is, given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition which you hand on, and many such things you do."
Yes, so the point is that even religious duties as we might see them, I don't like to use the word religion at all, but even such things as we do within the church, we mustn't assume that what we do in the church trumps what we must do for our parents. That's not the case, and may well not be correct at all. So this is an important duty, and we need to put it within its proper place and not neglect it. Let me move on to criterion number 26. And this is, Jesus will also acknowledge and reward us on the basis of the extent to which we acknowledged him before men in this life. So, here's an interesting passage which Jesus said. I'm going to read out Luke 12:8.
"And I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man also will acknowledge before the angels of God."
Yeah. So, as I read that, I don't think Jesus is going to merely acknowledge us in the sense of saying that he knows us. I mean, everyone will know that he knows us because we're going to be at the judgment seat. That's a place reserved for people that know him and who he knows. So the point is, that's self-evident that he knows you. So what do we mean by acknowledge? I think we mean more than just say, "I know you." He means more than that. He's going to openly honour those people who have openly honoured him. And he's going to ally himself to and be associated with those who have openly associated with him. And so, if you pay the price of acknowledging your allegiance to him in this world, and this is a hostile, unbelieving world, one day you'll be openly honoured by Jesus in front of the angels in heaven and in front of other believers. Because my firm expectation is that the judgment seat will be a public event. I mean, we have it as a strong tradition in this country, in the UK, that all justice is public. So every court case takes place in front of the public, in front of the media, in front of the press. Everyone's allowed in. It's very, very rare to have a private trial. Very, very rare. Now, if that's what we consider right, I think every indication in the scripture is that Jesus thinks that, or even more so. So the idea that you're going to have a private audience, I don't think so. It's going to be a public audience where what is said to you will be said in front of people. Now, I don't know how many people. It might only be the people who know you. And but I don't know how he's going to arrange the logistics of it, but somehow it's going to be public. How public, I don't know, but public means public. And so I want him to acknowledge me. So you need to therefore be thinking now, in what ways am I denying him? In what ways am I keeping my head down? In what ways am I just avoiding criticism? In what ways am I trying to keep out of trouble, not wanting to be associated with him? I don't want people to criticize me. I don't want people to laugh at me. I don't want people to sort of avoid me. I just want, don't let people know that I know him, because he's kind of bad news and he'll do harm to my reputation. Now, if you think that way, and many, many people do. Yes, John?
Towards the end of this verse 9, verse 8, also will confess before the angels of God. What is the significance of the angels in this context?
Yeah. Well, John's asking, what's the significance of Jesus acknowledging us before the angels? Well, I don't know. Does he mean that he's going to do so right now, here with the angels that are here around us right now? Or does he mean that he's going to acknowledge us in front of the angels who are going to be present at the judgment seat? Because I think they're going to be there as court ushers, and they're going to be there as witnesses. And I don't exactly know. And he leaves it unspoken. But my feeling is that it could well be both, but at the very least that he'll do it in front of the angels at the judgment. And maybe it'll be the very angels that were around us in this life. And because I think
it will be if you read the next verse.
Oh yeah, what's the next verse?
It says that he that denieth me before men shall be denied before the angels of God.
That's right. He that denies me before men shall be denied before the angels. Yeah. So.
Sean, have we got a personal angel? Because if we have, and I believe that we have, then that particular angel could be called as major witness.
Yes, I think we do. We have an angel that's recording what we do. We know that. We're told that each child has an angel. Mm-hmm. And so the Bible doesn't give us one fraction of the information that I wish it would give us about angels and so forth. It only gives us a little smattering. Evidently God considers that to be enough. He tells us what we need to know. So the exact details, Jan's asking, do we have a personal angel? The answer is, I think we have to say, we don't know. But I think we probably do. And given that we know that the angels are there guarding us, I can't imagine why God would have any reason to keep them on a continually changing shift rota. I think he's just going to send the same angels to look after us. So I think the same angel is hanging around each of us and has known us from childhood. And he knows your whole history. He's been with you the whole time.
And stays with us.
And stays with us. And is keeping a record as well.
Yes.
Keeping a record of what you do.
Sorry, it says in Psalm 91.
Yeah.
For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways.
Yeah, Psalm 91, he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all his ways. Yes, very true. Now, whether we know that's the same angel, we don't know. There are some things we just don't know. But we know that there are angels around us, and we know that he'll acknowledge us or deny us in front of those angels. So the precise details aren't necessary. They're interesting to ponder upon, but the point is that he'll do it. That's what matters. And so it's not just referring to whether people are saved. It's not only referring, I don't believe, to whether you outright deny him to such a degree that you're not a believer and he outright denies you, in which case you go to the great white throne. I think that's true. That is part of it. But he's also talking about whether you implicitly or partially deny him by just chickening out, by just being a wimp, by just being compromised, choosing popularity rather than faithfulness. And that's something that we can do 100 times in a week by just those little things, So it's something for us to think about, because if we realize the significance of this, it will impact the way we live. We've got choices to make. Do we obey so-and-so, or do we obey God? Do we honour so-and-so, or do we obey and honour God? And you have to make a choice. And recognising this will influence the way in which you make that choice. So we need to ensure that we openly identify ourselves with Jesus in this life. And that doesn't mean that we need to cover ourselves with Jesus badges and go around dressed up as a Christian, covered with banners and things. No, we don't need to do that. Some people might want to do that, but I don't ever want to wear Jesus badges, and I just want my life to be completely open. So I want to speak and act without fear or hindrance and without any holding back based on fear of people. Do you see? So it's not about wearing a badge, it's about being open and unashamed. And I think, first of all, it's right that we should do that, simply because it's right. But the point of this is that it will have a consequence. And so, let's read out this from Mark 8:38, the top of page 100.
For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed, when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels.
Yeah, now then, that statement can be taken to mean both of the unsaved and of the saved. I mean, the general assumption is it means the unsaved. That's what most people assume. But I think that that's a lazy assumption, and it's one that you have no authority to make. It's a statement that's a direct statement. He will be ashamed of those who are ashamed of him. Now, it's not qualified or limited to any particular group, and you have no authority or sanction to say, well, I limit that only to this group. The Bible doesn't say that. So the question is not, are you saved or unsaved? The question is, are you ashamed or unashamed? That's the issue. I've known many a person who is ashamed of the gospel. I've felt ashamed of the gospel myself on many occasions. Now, what does it mean to be ashamed of the gospel? It means to not wish to be associated with something that carries stigma and which will reduce you in the eyes of other people. Not right-thinking people, it will reduce you in the eyes of wrong-thinking people. But nonetheless, it will reduce you. So association with Jesus Christ will reduce you in the eyes of most people. So I've been conscious of that and felt ashamed, but the point is, what I've resolved to do is not to act on my shame, but to act in loyalty and to do what's right, even if I do feel fearful or ashamed or embarrassed, or just to do it anyway. And so what I'd learned was, the more you resist that feeling and do what you're not wanting to do, the very shame goes away. And now I feel almost no shame of being associated with Jesus Christ and speaking up for him. And, in all sorts of circumstances, I've been called upon to speak openly in front of secular groups and audiences. And the funny thing is that the more you do it, the easier it gets. When I was chairman of the Conservative Association in the town I used to live in, we used to have banquets and so on. And one day they asked me to pray, to give a grace at the meeting. And normally, there's an annual formal banquet, President's Dinner, and I was asked to give grace, and I gave a proper grace, a real prayer. And normally, the ordinary thing to do is to give one of these silly little graces, or even the man who did it the year before gave a kind of jocular grace and made a joke of it. Well, I gave a proper grace, and I felt a little bit awkward doing that, but I did it. And the point is that the more you do that, the easier it gets. So if you do feel ashamed of him, don't say to yourself, don't just pretend not to be ashamed. Acknowledge to yourself that you are, and then do the thing that you're ashamed to do. Do it anyway. It's totally the same as being afraid. Do what you're afraid of, do it anyway. That's the point. And if you're ashamed, do it anyway. And Jesus will consider it an even greater honour that you stood up for him, spoke up for him, when he knew that you were trembling at the time. Do you see? The very fact that you are makes it all the more an honour to him. But as you do it, you'll lose the very fear. You'll lose the shame anyway. It goes. So, and one thing I certainly don't want at the judgment seat is to have him expressing the fact that he's ashamed of me. Can you imagine that? Even if it was a private audience, which I don't think it will be, I wouldn't want it even in a private audience. And, I've heard of men in the police force telling me how they used to get a dressing down, a carpeting. You had to go and stand to attention. You know what that means, don't you? Stand rock steady with your arms by your side while the chief superintendent or whoever it is dresses you down, tells you off. I never had that. But I've heard from men who have, and they didn't like it. And I would have liked it even less. Now, can you imagine getting that from Jesus? Can you imagine him saying to you, even though you're saved and you're entering into his kingdom, and he tells you, I'm ashamed of you. Can you just ponder on that for a moment? Can you imagine him saying it? Now, this is your chance now to have that not happen to you. And it's folly to think those words would never be said to me. What makes you think those words would never be said to you? If you hold that view or say such words, you're probably a prime candidate to have those words said to you. Now, we need, whoever we are, to ponder on this. And again, another thing which, if we give it thought, will affect our present conduct. How long have we been going for, Chris? Do you know?
40 minutes or so.
40?
Yeah, 20 past, I think you started.
Yeah.
Did I?
Yeah, around 20 past.
20
No.
to 12 is
I thought it's
fine.
gone. Yeah, it's a bit later.
I'll tell you what then. I'll stop here and we'll start. Let's just see what I've got to do. I've got a fair bit to do actually. Let me just go on a little longer. I'll start number 27 and then I'll stop. Right, criterion number 27. A big one, an important one. Jesus will also judge us on the basis of the extent to which we were ready and waiting for his return. Now, this is another very controversial area, and I don't have time here to go into it in great detail. But to define exactly what this is talking about. But what we can say is that Jesus wants all of us to be actively engaged in waiting for his return to the earth. We're not to be passive about it. We're meant to be actively prepared, waiting actively. And the reason this is a little controversial is people differ in their views as to whether this is speaking about the rapture or the second coming. And I'll go on to talk about that a little in a moment, but I think he's talking about the rapture. But whatever he's talking about, he wants us actively prepared and ready for his return. So whatever your eschatology is, whatever your views are on future events and the return of Jesus and the precise manner and timing and so forth of his return, it doesn't matter. The point is you're meant to be actively prepared and waiting for it. And so, let's just... we're going to read in a moment from Luke 12, from a parable about a group of servants waiting for their master to return home. And Jesus equates himself with that master. And he urges all of us to make sure that while he's away, pending his return, because remember in the parable the master had gone away and the servants were waiting his return. So while Jesus is away, we are to be dressed for immediate action. We're to have lamps burning so that no time is lost in finding or lighting lamps. We're to be awake and waiting for his return. We're to be ready to take whatever action is needed on his return. So the metaphor is staying up all night waiting for the master to come. And so you're expecting the master any time. Now that's the metaphor. And we're to be expecting Jesus at any time. So Chris, can you read out Luke 12, 35 to 40?
Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at the table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect.
Yeah. Now, this theme, the theme of the parable is actively waiting for the return of Jesus Christ. Now, the reality is, at least in the UK, most of us are not doing any of that. So most people are not doing any of these things here that are metaphorically spoken of. Being dressed for action, lamps burning, awake and waiting, ready to take action. Concerning the return of Jesus Christ, the church in the main has entered into a kind of sleepwalk, a kind of coma, where I'm told back in the 60s and 70s, prophecy, eschatology, the return of Jesus Christ was a big subject, and people spoke about it a lot, a real lot. Now, we've moved, I wasn't around then, but we've moved to the opposite end of the spectrum, where the return of Jesus Christ is a complete non-event. It's just not spoken about. Now, the point then is this. Whatever your precise eschatology, you're free to hold whatever views you want on the precise details. The point is, if you're not even thinking or talking about it at all, then you're hardly fulfilling what Jesus is saying here. If it's not impacting on your life at all, and it's not part of your thinking, it's not part of your speech, it's not something you dwell upon, do anything about, it doesn't make any difference to what you do, well, in what sense can you be one of the servants that in the parable is praised for being ready? Aren't you going to be one of the servants who's going to be rebuked for not being ready? So simply being aware that Jesus is going to come back, well, being aware that he's coming back, well, that's nice, but that's not what we're called upon to do. We're not called upon just to know that he's going to come back. We're called upon to be actively waiting for him to return. And so, in that parable, you'll notice that the master reacts angrily and punishes those staff who are not ready. And the clear implication is that Jesus will do likewise. And so, do you want to read on, Chris? Luke 12, 41 to 48.
Peter said, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knows his masters will, but did not get ready or acting according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved the beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Okay, now this is a complicated parable, and I don't want to spend too long on this parable. We could spend actually hours on this parable. Who is it talking about? Is it talking about the unsaved or the saved? Is it talking about, is he saying that he's going to punish believers in a really severe way? Well, I don't exactly know what these punishments will involve. I don't know what a severe beating is. I don't know what a light beating is. And all I know is that it's saying these things. And one thing I can do, having a massive IQ, I have worked out that I don't want to have a severe beating or a light beating. So I don't really need to know the precise difference between the two, because I'd rather not have either of them. Do you see? So in a certain sense, what does it matter what each of those things are? The point is that we don't want them. And also note, in the final verse of that, in verse 48, it says, everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Now, does it sound, when we speak of people to whom much has been given, much has been entrusted, that Jesus is speaking of unbelievers? I think he's speaking of us. So there are some people within the church to whom much has been given. Education, position, wealth, influence, jobs, the right to speak, the right to do things, authority, all sorts of things have been given to certain people. And the question is, what did you do with it? How did you use it? So the more you've been given by way of knowledge in particular, the more will be demanded of you. But let's ask ourselves this question. Why should it make any difference whether we're ready and waiting or fast asleep when Jesus returns? Why does it matter so much to him? And so we need to point out firstly, this parable, in my opinion, is referring to Jesus returning for his church. That's the rapture. Now, I
think I'll pause at this moment. So in the next talk, talk 11, we'll go on to look at a little more about what the rapture is and why I think he's talking about that.